JT Tuimoloau. Wow. Ohio State has done it again. And the news for Ohio State is just terrific. Welcome to Snap Judgments, brought to you by Buyers Auto. That's Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham. I'm Austin Ward. And yes, Ohio State has done it yet again. Another NFL draft pick, putting it off for another year. JT Tuimoloau coming back to the Buckeyes. And I am a broken record, but it's a pretty big deal for Ohio State, Bill.
Yes, this is a big deal. Yet another big deal for Ohio State's defense, which I guess is going to be the best in college football next year. Like I don't know what we're doing here. This is kind of crazy. And even knowing or having like an inkling about a month ago that a lot of these guys were considering coming back. Some maybe had already made a decision and not yet made it public. Like now that we're here and it's all happened, at least with the defense, pretty insane. It's pretty insane what the Buckeyes are doing right now, getting all these guys to come back.
It's almost as insane as the intro to this show because
almost
super smooth on that. I think this.
I need to rehearse once in a while, don't I? I mean, that is butchered it. Oh well.
A really good example of how NIL is supposed to work.
Yeah.
Is this decision by JT Tuimoloau? He could have been a late first round, early second round pick. He has seen all of his classmates in the class of 2021 make this decision, and in a different era, he would not have been returning to Ohio State. Knowing that there's an opportunity to mitigate some of the losses that you lose from the not going pro in the NIL world, like, is huge. And then it allows a kid like this to make a decision that is probably in his best professional football interest, but also in interest of what he wants to do as a person and what his obligations are to his teammates. And I think it's a great way for all these things to kind of come together. And for all of the conversation we always have about NIL and how sometimes it's not being used the right way or how teams are doing it wrong, like, this is exactly right.
I think that's a great point. It has to be considered where, like, JT is a great test case or example for that, because while we know how massively important this can be for Ohio State and the value that he has to the Buckeyes, at the same time, you can also say it's 11 sacks in 3 years, and he would have to be taking a little bit of a gamble with probably very little chance of sneaking into the end of the first round. That's knowing that he's an NFL caliber player and almost certain to be on a roster if he wanted to be next year, and a chance for maybe a greater impact once he got to the next level than he's had through 3 years. But, like, that is the benefit. You don't have to take that gamble or risk, if you want to put it that way, and you can help your draft stock and accomplish those other things at the same time. Like, we know that JT has been really sound on the edge and much better against the run, and so just evaluating him solely off of 11 sacks in 3 years is not summing up his impact. But once you get into the next couple months of evaluation from NFL talent evaluators, well, that's going to be the number that they point to more often than not to go to a head-to-head comparison. Like, if you don't have to do that right now, you shouldn't. And putting JT with Jack instead of comparing against other guys across the country, that's a pretty advantageous situation for everybody involved. Like, JT can get better. He is an NFL player now, or could be, or should have, or would have been. But the fact that he doesn't have to really lets everybody win. We say that all the time. Like, you wouldn't blame him for his decision if he left. But these are the situations that are far more positive in the long run. And you're in Ohio State doing this time after time after time with multiple NFL caliber players is pretty remarkable.
It's just a much better use of your resources, I think. And like for the program one, and then for JT, like, he would have been drafted. I think he, at worst, he would have been a second round pick. And certainly would have been playing meaningful NFL snaps next year. But if we talked about with Denzel Burke, right, there's a major financial difference between being the 54th pick and being the 28th pick and being the 12th pick. And I think JT has the ceiling, I think, to be a guy who gets drafted in the first round and maybe early in the first round. And whether or not his production has matched up to this point, I think is a matter for some conversation. Sometimes you don't need it. Sometimes you get drafted on traits alone, and JT would have done that. But I do like that players now have an avenue to sort of keep themselves out of that uncertainty, which is what JT's doing here. by choosing to come back to Ohio State. You get a little financial piece with that when you decide to come back. It's not like you're doing it for free, but you give yourself an opportunity to get better as a player. And in Ohio State gets back a guy who can be one of the better defensive ends in all of college football next year. And like, I would much rather have my program be spending its NIL resources on something like this than on whoever the next 5-star freshman is going to be. And that's not to say that those guys won't eventually be impactful too, but I like known commodities, and JT is a known commodity and a guy who I think still has a lot of room to grow and continue to get better as he moves forward in his career. So yeah, this is a win-win for Ohio State. And I think like Berm said, the shining example, I think, of what NIL is supposed to be and how it should be used.
Yeah, for JT to get better, it's sort of incumbent now on Ohio State to let him do some of the things that will show what he's capable of. Athletically, he's a freak. Like, we don't talk about him in those terms sometimes because he plays that edge situation where he's basically just containing the edge all the time, and maybe he isn't getting to cut loose and go after the quarterback and show his athleticism. Zach Harrison was a 3rd-round pick, and has had a pretty productive rookie year for the Atlanta Falcons. JT Tuimoloau compares pretty favorably athletically to Zach Harrison and has been a very similar type of player at Ohio State as far as what they've been asked to do. Now I hope that Ohio State, as JT returns and Jack Sawyer returns, that these guys are given an opportunity to showcase what they can do. We talked about it on our Monday rewatch shows multiple times this year, Bill. Like, JT would pull out that spin move once every 3 weeks, and every time he did, it was devastating.
Yeah.
And he hit home. Like, let these guys showcase their talents a little bit. And you can do that now as you head into the 3rd year of a defensive scheme that they fully understand, and you believe or hope that the defensive linemen will be more simpatico with the rest of the defense when that occurs heading into year 3.
Yeah, I wonder what that'll look like, because Bill kicked it off on the top. Like, it's the best defense, most talented, most veteran in the country that's returning. Will JT and Jack be free to unleash some of that more consistently? I think you look at the season in half. Like, JT did a lot of his production up front, was really impactful. And like, oh, here you go. Like, maybe there's going to be another one of those Penn State performances coming. Like, you could see it. And then he didn't switch off, but the counting stats stopped a little bit, and Jack's went through the roof. It's like, can they get them both at the same time? Which is one question, and you'd like to think that they can. Then the second part is then, how do you help incorporate in Caden Curry, Kenyatta Jackson, Mitchell Melton, CJ Hicks, if we're talking about maybe a best case scenario of moving him to that position? And I realize that as I'm saying it and describing it this way, that it sounds like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. Like, the best players need to play. They take all those snaps, and I talk about the rotation, or have in the past with Larry Johnson. But probably if you're asking these two guys to come back, you're not asking them to play 700 snaps next year. That probably wouldn't put them in position for the NFL draft accordingly either. So I am curious what that looks like. It's the best possible problem you can have. And so I'm not suggesting it as a cause for concern or that I'm worried about it. I'm just wondering what it looks like.
Yeah, I mean, you would hope that the Kenyatta Jacksons and Caden Currys are more positioned or better positioned to be impactful players next year than maybe they were in 2023. And then I think you need to embrace that if you're Ohio State. I agree with you. Like Jack and JT both played more than 600 snaps this year. JT played, I think, the 2nd most snaps of anyone on the defense as a defensive end, which is kind of crazy. I think that number does need to come down a little bit for Jack, for JT, for Tyleek. Like, you need to utilize your depth a little bit here, and I think be smarter about how you use those guys, especially in a 12-team playoff world where you're adding a couple extra games. If you want to win a national championship, you need to find ways to keep those guys fresh throughout the year. And I think Ohio State will do that. Like, it's not the top end returnees they have are insane. Like, it's ridiculous, but it's a program that has always recruited really well too. So like the depth is there at some spots too. And I think especially at defensive end. So I'm envisioning it looking a little different maybe than it looked last year. Maybe not JT and Jack on the field like every single snap, how it felt like it was for much of last season, but we'll see how that goes. And I wonder too with JT in terms of his production, because the middle of the year, it really did feel like he was starting to take off a little bit. Like, if you look at not just like sacks and TFLs, but like pressures generated, there was a significant uptick there. And then he had that weird play against Wisconsin where he kind of got like speared in the ribs or on the hip, wherever that was. And I didn't think he was the same player from that point on. He continued to play, but I do wonder how much that injury and that whatever it was that happened to him there in that game might have impacted him down the stretch. Because I agree with you, Austin. I didn't think he was quite the same player. Still good, still making some plays here and there, but watching Jack kind of take off while JT kind of plateaued, it was noticeable.
And it was Jack who speared him.
It was, yeah. Let the conspiracy theories fly.
I mean, JT also got like crumpled in half the next week, and the back injury that he'd been dealing with, like he was not him 100% towards the end of the year. But I think that speaks to what your guys' point is. If you got Kenyatta Jackson coming back, and that was precarious for a moment or two this offseason about whether or not he would return, he obviously was given an assurance that you're going to come back and have a role on this defense. You better find a way to do that. And I think the interesting thing with Jack and JT is we talked about it a lot this past offseason. Is there a world where Jack or JT can play some 3-tech? It allows you to keep Tyreek Williams on the field, move those guys into more of what Larry Johnson was doing with the Rushman package a few years ago, and then you can put Kenyatta Jackson on the other side. I think that's something that now has to be a part of this regular discussion. I think it's also worth noting that JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer are not Nick Bosa and Chase Young. I mean, they're very different players, and to expect them to both be getting 9-10 sacks a season or 11-12 sacks, what people were expecting out of the 2018 Buckeyes when Chase and Nick were there together, like that's not the same guy. They're not the same type of athlete or the same type of schematic player. So what you got out of those guys this past year was great. And the expectation now for 2024 is through the roof. I mean, as you said, like this is going to be the number one defense in the country heading into the season. And with a potential 16-game season, you need to find a way to make sure all these guys stay healthy throughout it. Fortunately, Ohio State's schedule is somewhat weak. Let's just call it what it is. You got 3 big games, and that's about it. So you have an opportunity, you'd think, to do all these things that you need to do and without jeopardizing someone's health or without risking pissing someone off by not playing them enough, etc.
How surprised were you that Ohio State and JT got to this point, Bill?
This was the most surprising, I think, of all the decisions we've seen play out so far. JT throughout like December, correct me if I'm wrong, we didn't talk to him, right? He didn't do the pre-bowl media day. He didn't talk when we were in Dallas. So there was a lot of mystery there. And you add in that at least my belief anyway, that there was the potential for him to maybe be a first rounder, at worst like an early day 2 guy, I think, just based off of his traits. I was of the mind probably up until 3 days ago, that he was going to leave. So this is like the decision today happening was not surprising. That notion flipping in my head a little bit a couple days ago was because I just thought that there was a lot stacking up against Ohio State to keep JT, both like maybe what it would have cost to do it, and then also just the opportunities ahead of him maybe would have been too great to pass up anyway. So, in terms of like the work required to get something done, this feels like maybe the best job that Ohio State and the powers that be did of retaining someone on the roster.
The powers that be. Berm, were you surprised?
I mean, only because what we heard a week ago was so decidedly different than what we started to hear on Thursday morning. Whatever changed, whether it was an updated expectation of what the NIL market actually was, whether it was just JT. I mean, you got to remember JT and his recruitment didn't make a decision until June. 6 months after everyone else signed. This is not a kid that operates.
It was July, wasn't it?
I think he made the decision like end of June. No, it was July 4th or something, right? Like July 2nd. So this is a kid that does not operate on anyone else's timeline. He obviously is very comfortable stepping out on his own and being the outlier. So I think from that perspective, like you could see if he went to the NFL because of what Bill said, like traits alone, you put him in the combine setting. This is a kid who's going to turn some heads. We heard rumors about USC. We heard rumors about what the dollar amount was that people were discussing, and all of those things seemed a little bit far-fetched. So I don't know if it was a matter of the expectations changing, or if those are just things. Sometimes like if you're in a negotiation, you should always start as high as you can possibly start, right?
Yeah.
So maybe it was just, those sort of things. But I think ultimately it seemed clear that JT wanted to come back a month ago. That was what we heard in December, but then he didn't show up on the media day that we had and didn't talk in Dallas. So then all of a sudden you start to think, well, maybe this is different than, there's two guys that we expected to hear from early on. We didn't. And one of them was JT. The other was Travion Henderson. We talked to Travion in Dallas, but here we are now, Friday, 2:30. And Travion's the only guy that hasn't made an announcement with 2 days left till the deadline. So I guess I put stock into who we weren't talking to, but now I guess it really doesn't matter.
It doesn't.
Well, I mean, it doesn't matter now because here's JT announcing and Travion still has.
Well, hey, why not spread them out? That's what I wanted them to do. Do one every single day. Let Ohio State build some momentum. They call some press conferences, like really milk it. I think they've got them. They haven't got the most out of it in terms of PR, but I guess the best PR is having really good players staying in your program.
Yeah.
And so however they decide it, I guess it doesn't matter what I want. It never matters what I want, but that's probably okay.
Do you want to do a press conference with 11 people at one time?
I mean, people mock the idea. They're like, oh, that would be too much work. Austin wouldn't do that. Are you kidding me? I would go 11 days in a row to cover that stuff and still do more snap judgments every single day. I'd be happy to do it. Like, these decisions are big deals and they should be celebrated accordingly. I mean, I'm
all about production value. I wanted an elaborate 11-man press conference. I wanted something made for TV.
Yeah.
Like what the Heat did when they signed LeBron and Chris Bosh. Yeah.
Yes, but times 3.5.
Yeah.
JT, the decision. Could have done that. It's a good way to make NIL money too.
It is.
Let's
go.
What I'm saying.
They should.
You have to start
put us in charge. Yeah, I know. Anyway, it's free advice for guys who probably don't need it because they make more money than all of us combined. Anyway, JT is coming back for another year, another huge deal for Ohio State. Had to break it down again with some live snap judgments. They're brought to you by Buyers Auto. There's one more decision left for the Buckeyes. We'll be waiting to see what Travion Henderson elects to do. And if there is one more bout of good news coming the Buckeyes' way, we'll break it down either way. That's Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham. I am Austin Ward. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you later.